Okay, we will now begin the debate for the candidates for East Hampton Town Supervisor. The candidates in the election for this position are Jeffrey Bragman, Peter van Scoyoc, and Kenneth Wallace. Since the Republican candidates have declined participation in Zoom debates, those participating in this debate will be Jeffrey Bragman, endorsed by the Independence Party, and Peter van Scoyoc, endorsed by the Democratic and Working Families Party. The candidates will speak in alphabetical order, and each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Each candidate will then have up to 2 minutes to respond to each question, and will have 1 minute for a closing statement. In addition, each candidate will have 3 opportunities to speak out of turn for 1 minute to rebut a response from the other candidate. If you would like to take advantage of this opportunity, please raise your hand and keep it raised until you are sure that I see you. The candidates will now give their opening statements, and Jeffrey Bragman will give his opening statement first. Jeffrey?
Hello, and thank you. I'm in this race because a simple reason. East Hampton is my home, and I want to protect it. It's not just a place I live, it's a part of who I am. And talking to residents in the campaign, I have heard a sense of unease and even fear about what the future is as they see houses and parties getting bigger and bigger and the local community getting smaller and smaller. Now, I know things change, but I also know it's important to keep East Hampton quiet, calmer, and slower, because the beauty and tranquility of East Hampton is what gives us solace, and it's also our greatest resource. And I think we all also know that the local community is our lifeblood. What gives me the most satisfaction about local government is when we can actually help people's lives. I've worked with affordable housing, stop signs, sea level rise, stopping aircraft impacts. Solving all these large and small problems is what it takes to sustain our beautiful community. I know that elected officials do best when we listen to people, when we trust local knowledge and local experience. And I want government to be accessible and understandable. I have a record of real results. When Springs residents found a plan that was going to put a cell tower in a woodland reserve that they had used for generations, I was there to help them. When Amagansett faced dust storms with dangerous air quality that shut school recess and damaged their houses, I was there to help. When Wainscott residents' wells were contaminated, they needed in-home filtration while they waited for public water, I was there to help. And when there was a plan to change the Springs Dog Park, frankly, with very little public input, all the park users wanted and the small dog owners wanted was to be heard. I was there to help. I believe in leading by listening. I believe we govern best that way. I think public participation is the heart of local government, and I invite the participation of everybody listening tonight in the effort to make our town better as your new supervisor.
Thank you. Peter?
Well, good evening, and I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for providing the opportunity to our community to hear directly from the candidates. I've served as East Hampton for more than 2 decades now, 11 years on the planning and zoning boards, 10 years on the town board, and I'm seeking my 3rd term as supervisor. Throughout my many years of service, I've always placed preserving the environment, water quality, and building our community's strength and resilience at the forefront of my efforts. I've worked to preserve hundreds of acres of open space, protect public beach access, preserve historic structures. But what has been most challenging and frankly most rewarding has been safely guiding the community through the worst global pandemic in a century. We kept our COVID-19 infection rate to the 3rd lowest on Long Island by providing COVID testing sites and creating a vaccination clinic, enlisting more than 100 community volunteers to administer over 9,000 doses to our residents. In a statement released today, and I quote, Governor Hochul pledged her support to Supervisor Peter van Scoyoc and his team to continue their efforts in fighting the impacts of climate change, particularly coastal erosion, the town's efforts to preserve open space while at the same time providing affordable housing. The governor indicated that she looks forward to working with Mr. van Scoyoc over the next 2 years and providing East Hampton the state's assistance wherever possible. I'm the Democratic candidate for East Hampton Town Supervisor, endorsed by the working parties. Working Families Party, the New York League of Conservation Voters, the Sierra Club, the Long Island Environmental Forum, Legislator Bridget Fleming, County Executive Steve Bellone, and Newsday. I ask you for your vote on November 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now begin the questions, and Jeffrey Bragman, you will answer the first question first. What is your position on the future of the East Hampton Airport?
Well, we're in a better place than we've been in decades, and I'm the only one on the town board that's announced a constructive and a factual plan. We have the ability to regain local control by a very simple means, and once we do, for the first time in decades, we can actually control traffic. And I've suggested that we have a pause in corporate jets and commercial seaplanes, helicopters, and turboprops for an entire year, really stretching out for another season into 2022. During that time, we have to protect Montauk. It's extremely important to protect Montauk and have their back. We would allow local pilots to use the airport. Emergency access would be available. The tower would be up. And what we could do in real time is we could adjust how we manage the airport traffic as we move along, because when we have local control, we have the authority to do that, and we can be nimble about doing it. So it's a real opportunity, I think, to play out some of the problems and issues that people are now discussing with a little bit of perhaps less knowledge in real life than they would like to have. And I think it's important that I think it's extremely important that our first priority, our very first priority, is to give relief after 2 decades of enduring, very serious impacts from aircraft to the people who suffered those impacts. I think that's the first priority. And in fact, when I was at Montauk this last weekend, they feel the same way. And I feel that that's an important aspect of looking at this problem. We are one town, we have one problem, and we have one solution. And we finally have the tools where we can control it. And the best way to start is with a pause of this traffic.
Thank you. Peter?
Well, first of all, Jeffrey's not the only one to have put out a position on the airport. I issued a press release on October 11th, clearly stating what my plan is to curb aircraft noise without diverting to Montauk. Jeffrey's plan initially, he wrote a letter in the paper spelling it out. It included all jets and all helicopters for a 1-year holiday, as he called it. Frankly, there's no holiday in Montauk if you're diverting all of that traffic, or a good portion of at least 34%, according to our studies, of that traffic would go to Montauk. I've said from the beginning that solving a problem in one part of town only to displace it to another part of town is no solution at all. We are in a position where the FAA grant assurances have expired, and we can finally, take decisive action to gain control over what is, I think, agreed to by all as out of control airport, or airport that's grown beyond the footprint that the community desires to have. And, so at this point, I think there are a number of steps we can take. My approach is different than Jeffrey's in that I think we should dial back the air traffic. We need to address the noise issues, the environmental issues, and the volume and frequency of aircraft, but we need to do it in reverse order rather than just shut everything down and see what happens, see where the traffic spills to, and try and mop it up later. I think a more deliberative and a rationed and reasoned approach is much better. I do anticipate that we will be able to have significant reductions to eliminate commercial traffic at the airport early in the new year. There will be, as we understand it, the necessity to close the airport for a period of time, short period of time, and reopen as a publicly owned private use airport in order to completely shift away from the FAA grant assurances. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to have a rebuttal, if I may.
Okay, rebuttal.
I don't know what Peter's plan for the airport is. I don't think the public knows what his plan is, and I'm not sure Peter knows what his plan is. He's done a lot of talking about curfews, and that was where he landed first. curfews won't help us. We've known this for 2 years. It's why we stopped negotiating with the FAA. They offered us curfews. Then he moved closer to my plan because I talked about specific aircraft that we would have a pause on. And he started saying, well, we could control some aircraft. But my question to my opponent is, what aircraft would you control? What air traffic that I've mentioned would you control? Would you control jets? Would you control seaplanes? Would you control turboprops? Would you control helicopters? He won't say because he's taking money from airport interests and he's got a foot in both sides of this issue. He's unwilling to make a stand, a clear stand on what he's going to, which aircraft he would allow and which he won't. He wants to say he's not going to hurt Montauk, and he says he's going to control East Hampton. Those two statements cannot mesh. They cannot
Thank
mesh.
you.
And he hasn't
Thank
told us how.
That's it. Thank you. Second question, and Peter, you will be the first to answer this one. How would you propose to address the lack of adequate cell phone service in Springs?
Well, the first thing I did was during the pandemic, we realized that not only were there gaps in coverage, but there was capacity issues. Everybody using their cell phones and computers, live streaming, entertainment, working remotely, school remote, and really exacerbated a problem we already have. I formed a wireless communications committee to specifically address this issue. We hired an outside consultant. A poll was conducted of residents. Nearly 90% of residents responded that connectivity was more important to them than aesthetics. I think, we understand there's gaps in coverage. We need a comprehensive way to address that. And this study is part of that. The consultant Cityscape reviewed every single communications location within the town. They took notes of all the equipment used. They were able to put together heat maps to show exactly where the coverage issues were. And we also know what the capacity issues are. My idea would be to conduct a location of town-owned property primarily, but possibly other private properties where we can put cell phone towers that would address those communication gaps. We recently allowed for Verizon to put a tower on town-owned property on Stephen Hand's Path. There's a new tower with AT&T by the Northwest Fire Substation, and we're in negotiations with the Girl Scout camp at Camp Blue Bay. Those negotiations are winding down. I believe we'll reach an agreement soon on that location as well. We know that there are additional coverage gaps in Northwest Woods, landfall area over near the Nat Peak stretch and portions of Montauk. There are a number of ways to address these, and we're going to continue looking at it.
Okay, thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this because it shows a real difference between me and my opponent. What happened recently was, as we were nearing the election and the pressure grew to fix cell phone coverage in Springs, the town board on its own decided that they were going to plunk a cell phone tower in the Crandall, Norfolk neighborhood in a woodland that had been used for generations as a recreational area. And the neighbors were obviously very concerned about it. And I raised the issue with the town board that it might be important to tell them about what was going on. And instead, they just put it on a work session and started talking about it. Well, of course, the neighborhood, and what my opponent said was, we have to put it in this location because we couldn't negotiate with the Girl Scouts and Camp Blue Bay. Absolutely said that was the reason that we had to do it. I did a little homework on that subject because I listened to the neighbors. And I walked the neighborhood and I said, this is ridiculous. You don't put a 185-foot tower in the middle of a neighborhood where they enjoy this recreational area. I picked up the phone and found out very quickly that the Girl Scouts were stunned by being blamed for slowing us down on our process. And in fact, the manager of the camp said, we'll give you the tower you want. You guys stopped your negotiations with us. That's what the supervisor told the public, and he stuck to that story. The fact is, Camp Blue Bay was a better location. Everybody knew it was the optimal location. My view is we don't have to punish one neighborhood to save another neighborhood. I don't believe in pitting neighbor against neighbor. This is a townwide problem in Springs. And I was able to find a solution that hurt no neighborhood and got us in the optimal location. Why? Because I listened to people. I walked the neighborhood, I saw it, and I was frankly pretty horrified when I walked the neighborhood because it's a very pretty 6-acre woodland. It was a bad decision that the town board under my opponent's leadership tried to shove down the throats of the neighbors.
Okay, thank you. Peter, did you want to rebut
Yeah,
that?
I just wanted to say that. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I totally disagree with Mr. Bragman's characterization of how things went. We did actually engage the community in public discussion by having work sessions. That is the process by which we inform the public of discussions that the town board is having. Transparent, in the open. We invite the community in. We got comments from them. And, we're up against the wall in terms of trying to complete a townwide emergency communication system. Springs is underserved both with emergency communications as well as cell towers. We looked at all potential sites, every single location that could possibly hold a cell tower site. This particular property came up. I never suggested that was had to go there. I never made that suggestion at all. And in fact, under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, you have to look at all potential locations. I think what came out of the public discussion, in fact, was the Girl Scouts understood that American Tower was holding up our agreement.
Okay. Next question. Jeff, you're going to go first on this. The town has until December 31st to opt out of marijuana sales. What do you think the town should do about the sale of marijuana?
I'm sorry, did you direct this at me first?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Actually, we were just talking about this the other day, and we're up against a fairly strict timeline to opt out or to opt in. And there is a different, first of all, I want to say I'm pro marijuana. I'm very happy to see marijuana legalized. I frankly, surprised that I lived long enough to see it because there was so much opposition. So I do favor it. I think it's an innocuous drug. And not long ago, there was an incident, really only like this year, where a man was arrested in Texas for possession of marijuana and died in custody. So it's inflicted horrible pain unnecessarily. On opting in, I think the consensus of the board is that we are going to opt out in order to get more public opinion on the two issues, which are dispensaries and locations where you can use marijuana. And frankly, it's not a cop out. This I really want to hear a little bit more from our neighbors. It's an issue that could impact the quality of life. It could help us with taxes. I know that there's going to be dispensaries and recreational use in the reservation up the road, but I do. As I said, I'm pro marijuana. I'm very happy it's happening. I just like a little more time so we can really take some public opinion in. I believe in listening to public opinion on this.
Thank you, Peter.
So we've had 3 work sessions already to engage public comment. We've had very little public comment. There has been some comment from those who might be interested in putting together grow houses to actually produce marijuana. The legislation, I think, is good in that it decriminalizes marijuana. I think that was long overdue. I think I agree with that. However, like any type of business, I think having zoning laws in place to regulate it, because I don't think it's appropriate to have dispensaries and sites of consumption just anywhere. I think they should be restricted to particular zones. There is no category in our zoning law for dispensaries or sites of consumption. Beyond that, the state has not yet finished their rules for the licensing of these types of operations. I think that causes me to, I give pause to that. I'd like to know how they're going to license things before we make a commitment of this nature. I do think further public engagement is important. We are on a rather limited timeline in that we have to, have a resolution, bring it to public hearing, and make a determination on that resolution before the 31st of December. And I think we should kick the cannabis down the road and take it up in the new year so that we have our zoning in place. I think also, we should consider the consumption of marijuana in public much the same way we address alcohol, in that we shouldn't allow it in places where we wouldn't allow open containers of alcohol. I think that would be appropriate to put those rules and regulations in place as well. I think taking our time, we have a lot of, I think, more pressing issues right now that we're dealing with. So we'll kick the cannabis down the road.
Thank you. All right, the next question, Peter, you will go first. Governor Hochul has signed the Peconic Bay Community Housing Fund Act that would add an additional 0.5% transfer tax on the sale of developed property if approved by the town. If the referendum is approved, how do you think the funds would be most effectively used to increase affordable workforce housing?
Well, first of all, I'm extremely pleased that the governor did sign the bill that, Fred Thiel has tenaciously sponsored now for 2 years, and it's passed both the House and the Assembly and the Senate twice. The governor signed it into law. There will be a referendum required, a local referendum, which will occur next November. And in the meantime, we need to develop a plan for how those funds would be used and process and policy about those funds. There's a whole myriad of ways that this money could be used to help address what is truly an epic crisis in housing affordability. Property values have skyrocketed, especially since the pandemic. There's a real shortage of rental housing. We need to address housing for seasonal workers as well as year-round residents. And we'd be able to, offset the costs and subsidize housing to help local families be able to purchase existing homes within the town, with the town retaining, my plan would be for the town to retain underlying rights in the property to ensure that it would remain affordable in perpetuity. Those folks would be able to gain some equity over time as well. I think there's opportunity to help with first-time home buyers' down payments. There's ways to help fund seasonal housing, and there's a whole array of different ways that we can address those issues. But I'm really pleased that we would have another non-property tax revenue source to be able to address this problem, because one of the constraints that we've had is with the 2% tax cap, using general municipal funds to house these, to fund these housing projects really has constrained us.
Okay, thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, I'm very excited about this initiative and spoke to Fred about it a couple of weeks ago. It really opens up a whole new world for us. Just having, if you see the effect that the CPF funding has had on our ability to buy and preserve lands, imagine a fund of that size, which we could commit to housing initiatives. I remember when I first started working for the town back in 1984, 1985, Judith Hope had just built Whalebone 1 and Whalebone 2. Those are single family residence subdivisions, affordable subdivisions. And we haven't seen any of those since then. And they're a great idea. When we did all of our opinion gathering about what people really wanted in affordable housing, overwhelmingly they supported single family housing. And this kind of funding could help us. Actually, I have to correct it. We have had one or two single family housing developments since then, but they were the big ones. And I think this will be an opportunity to buy small homes when they come on the market and preserve their affordability, give first time homeowners help with their down payment. It could help us buy land and do subdivisions for single family housing and make it much simpler to do the financing on it. And it really opens up a whole new area of creativity to try to create, to try to attack this problem for the first time with adequate funding. So I'm very excited about it.
Thank you. Peter, you wanted to rebut that?
Not as much as just make an additional comment. Maybe a little bit of rebuttal and pushback on the number of housing units. I will say that, my time on the town board has resulted in the largest number of affordable housing units the town has done since 2006. And in fact, there was basically a 10-year hiatus before I came on the board of no housing projects whatsoever. East Hampton has over 600 units now. We've brought in 50 units in this last couple of years. And by the way, I will say that meeting the governor personally and lobbying for this passage and also adding, my voice multiple times to Fred. I've sent letters myself alone as well as signed on. This effort is well underway. And again, now it's up to us to design this plan and put it up for referendum.
Okay, thank you. All right, Jeff, you're going to go first on the next question. And the question is, what suggestions would you have for how the town can help businesses get back to normal after the pandemic?
Well, we've done, we've actually had some initiatives during the pandemic, where we readjusted seating and the arrangements of restaurants to let them do outdoor seating and expand in the outdoors so that they could function and survive, frankly, as the pandemic worsened. And I think that was very helpful to them. We have a business committee, and actually they've been very involved in dealing with us on the COVID regulations that we, were contemplating imposing on restaurants, and helped us, tailor them so that they didn't impede their business. And I think that relationship has been very helpful between the businesses and the town. I really think that the way out of this, frankly, for businesses is at this point that we have adequate testing. And, we've had some problems with the testing companies that we hired. It turned out that one of the companies I found out and brought it to the board's attention was under investigation in California for failing to deliver tests in a timely fashion. They've been working for us at Town Hall and in Montauk for months, and we've been getting complaints in. In fact, we got a complaint in from our former Democratic challenger for Congress saying, I can't get results, and they're overbooking tests. They're making me do 3-4 tests. So to get out of COVID in the phase that we're in, accurate, fast testing is really critical. We just hired a replacement firm. I was glad to see it, but we did sort of slip a little bit on helping ourselves have a better business recovery, because we've had personnel in restaurants that got sick with COVID. When that happens, you need quick tests. And if you don't get the quick tests, they're useless because you can't do contact tracing. So I think the answer at the stage that we are at now is better testing, faster testing, and the testing that we need, not excessive testing. It seems like we're starting that now.
Okay, thank you. Peter?
So I knew it was going to be critically important when the pandemic hit to work with business community to understand what the impacts were going to be and were in real time. I formed the Business Recovery Committee, and that's been ongoing on a regular basis. We heard directly from the hospitality industry, the restaurant business too, that were very hard hit, particularly the restaurant, bar, and tavern sector. We put together through my emergency declaration an executive order that would allow for outdoor dining, as well as allow for certain other types of businesses that suffered, such as gyms and yoga studios and whatnot, to be able to hold, to suspend zoning, to be able to allow them to hold safely there and conduct their businesses outdoors. Additionally, we know that in talking to them that they, like the town, are struggling with staffing issues. And staffing issues directly are relating to both the geographical location and obstacles of transportation. I've worked directly with Fred Thiel and Jay Schneiderman to put together the South Fork Commuter Connection, as well as last mile bus service to be able to move efficiently workers in and out. But we also have to deal with this housing issue. As far as testing goes, testing, we got testing in next to town hall with Hudson River Healthcare very early on the pandemic. They were there for, I think, a couple of months. Then we brought in an outside vendor to provide testing at town hall. And then later in Montauk, both of which my opponent supported, it was a unanimous vote of the board. We did have concerns of late when we started getting some, calls that tests weren't coming back soon. I contacted and brought forward a new company, and testing is now expanded, and turnaround times are 24 hours from the lab.
Okay, thank you.
It's free as well, free testing as well.
Peter, you will go first on the next question also. COVID-19 is still with us. What is your opinion of masking and or vaccination requirements for individuals attending indoor events in the town? And what about town employees? Should vaccinations be mandated? Peter.
I became very concerned towards the end of the summer when the Delta variant of COVID arrived here in East Hampton, and we saw a rapid spread, and the numbers of infections were rising. There have been some breakthrough cases with vaccinations, but I think what's important to understand is that it's not a serious infection if you've been vaccinated for almost every single case. And I think going forward, we've seen from our town hall experience when I went back to remote meetings and our town staff have been under a mask requirement, that transmission in the workplace is virtually non-existent. But we have seen upticks in the rate of infection of employees outside of the workplace, either coming in contact with friends or loved ones. So that's an ongoing concern for us. I do think, especially in certain circumstances, that wearing masks indoors is very prudent, and people should continue wearing masks indoors. As I've said, our experience is that there's virtually no transmission in the workplace when we have masks indoors. And I do hope to get back to in-person meetings soon. Once the numbers have declined to a point where I think that's advised, we will certainly do that. But that's one of our best ways out of this pandemic, for people to be vaccinated and to wear masks. And it's unfortunate there's been so much politicization of this pandemic. I think we would have fared so much better if there hadn't been that dynamic. In terms of requiring vaccinations for town workers, I will leave it to the public health officials to inform us as to whether or not that's the right way to go.
Thank you. Jeff?
I think that obviously vaccinations and masks are essential to protect our continuing safety. And I think there's another piece of medical equipment that could help us stay safe. And that it's not really medical equipment, it's candor. And it's something that has been lacking in my opponent as we've gone on in the COVID pandemic, because there have been a couple of occasions when we had outbreaks in town offices, among town employees in town offices that dealt with the public, and they weren't disclosed. In fact, one of them I had to ask about. I found out about it and said, is it true that we've had a COVID outbreak among town workers in a certain office? And it's true that they may have picked it up not on the job. They may have become infected out of the job, but they were in a town office dealing with the public. I think it's very important. In fact, the first responsibility in dealing with with COVID as a public official is to be candid about what's going on. We don't make people safer by refusing to disclose what's going on. They become safer with more knowledge. So I think that is a policy that can help us. I support a mandatory vaccination. I would support it in town hall. I don't see why not. And frankly, I know that historically the law in the United States, the precedent in the United States Supreme Court has been very favorable to mandatory vaccinations in epidemics. But somehow we live in an age where the social compact seems to have been severed. And I think that leaders of good conscience and strong resolve might agree that it is a good idea to mandate masks. And if I were supervisor, I'd be advocating for mandatory vaccinations. I think it only makes sense. We want to get out of this. And it relates to your question about what's going to make business come back. COVID going away is what is going to make business go back. Let's get vaccinated. Let's get tested.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, you'll go first on the next question also. And that is, do you think the change in population indicated in the 2020 census requires any changes in town services? And if so, what would you suggest?
Well, yeah, it's clear that increase in town population has affected our quality of life enforcement. And we're hearing many more quality of life complaints about litter, about speeding, and in general about disregard for the law, loud partying, car racing on the streets. So it is clear that it's affected us. I do think that some of the bump in the population appears to have lessened. It's a little bit like 911, where we had a big influx and then we had a slow exit of many people. But we're hearing many more complaints. I was just sitting out with a group in the good weather over in Maidstone Park, and they're establishing themselves as a sort of independent group, and they're really concerned about the failure to pick up litter, speeding on the streets. Montauk is the stores and shops are litter. There's considerable litter, and we have to do something about that as well. I have a momentary problem. My battery is running out, and I have to make sure it's plugged in. I'm sorry to bother you, but I got a sign on my screen, and I don't want to lose it. Can we fix it? I hope you can save the time for me. Okay, I think we're okay. If I go blank, I'll have to sign in again. So yes, it has, and we need more litter. We need more police enforcement, but we're having trouble having the force that we need because the police academy was suspended for a while. We've lost a lot of police officers to injuries, so they are very hard pressed. And when you throw them into the party season in Montauk, trying to maintain noise and quiet and calm, they're overstressed. The highway department's overstressed. So the answer is yes, and the solution is funding. We need more funding, and we're aware of the problem. And in the meanwhile, we're trying to do the best we can with what we have. Okay,
thank you, Peter.
Well, it's interesting that my opponent says that the answer to the solution is more funding. I find that almost humorous, if not sad. We had a budget meeting recently where we presented the budget, and I've expanded the number of police officers and code enforcement agents. But Mr. Bragman had absolutely no comments during that work session. And it wasn't until Kathy Burke-Gonzalez point blank asked Jeff, do you have any comments? And he thought for a minute, and then he basically reiterated the comments that I had made and other board members had made. I think there's no doubt whatsoever that since the pandemic started, that we have a much larger year-round population. Everybody knows that. While some folks may have started to go back to the city and elsewhere now, there will be a continued demand on additional services, and it's across the board. It's everything from sanitation to enforcement, to social services, every single aspect that we have to deal with. And, we're restricted by a 2% tax cap. And I presented a budget this year initially showing an austerity budget and warning the town board members that in order to provide additional services, there will come a time in the very near future where I think we will have to break the 2% tax cap in order to meet the demand for services. Now, we are looking at all potential sources of non-tax revenue that we can increase, as well as, it's been really important to me that we be able to raise the rate of pay for our workers in order to retain and attract new staff. More than 100 positions will be regraded under the budget. That was something I suggested. The board has agreed with that. So I think there are going to be more demands, and we can only meet it by increased funding.
Thank you. All right, the next question you will also go first on. What steps would you suggest the town take to reduce the effects of climate change?
Well, I've been very, very active on this front. And, unlike my opponent who's actually, pushed back against a number of initiatives we've had, whether it was offshore wind or charging stations in downtown Montauk, because he was concerned somehow having a brand name on it would be advertising for a large corporation. We've put in a solar roof incentive program. Back in 2018, I converted my electric to solar. 3 years ago, I've saved well over $5,000. I'm producing 120% of my electric use. We've encouraged others to do that. We put together the first megawatt scale solar farm, and that's at Accabonac on a repurposed brush dump. We've revised the solar code. We had a peak load relief program, which my opponent opposed because he thought that he didn't even understand it. That basically what it did was it reduced peak load so that the need for fossil fuel peaker plants wouldn't have to come online while we wait for the wind project to be completed. I put together the CARP committee, again, another committee that I formed to deal directly with this issue. My opponents never even formed a committee. We did energy benchmarking, LED lighting in downtown Montauk. We've changed our fleet to EVs, electric vehicles, wherever possible. We've put a number of charging stations. We're putting in another 20 charging stations with room to expand. We have a solar lawnmower at Town Hall now. We have to do every single thing we can in order to meet this crisis. We're seeing, the devastation of our forest lands due to a pest that was never able to survive here because it was never warm enough in the winter. Now it doesn't freeze long enough. We have to deal with this problem now.
Okay, Jeff?
Peter, it's just not true that I opposed EV chargers, and it's just not true that I opposed wind power, and you know it, and I know it. Before I voted for the EV chargers, I mentioned the fact that it was Tesla was the company, and they had mostly Tesla chargers, which are very expensive automobiles in the $100,000, $150,000 range, although now they're coming down in price. So before I voted yes, I insisted that they put in universal chargers as well that didn't have the Tesla sign, because I didn't want to convert Montauk into a Tesla car dealership or indicate that a high-end automobile company was the way to solve our energy crisis. So that's just a misstatement. And as to wind power, I support wind power and always have as one of the tools in our tool chest. What my opponent didn't like is that I also supported environmental review of the project. And he came into my office in the first month when they proposed it, leaned his full height over my desk and said, we have to give away those easement rights. That's the land rights for the extension cord to the project, because they're going to give us $8 million. And I looked at him and said, Peter, I'm not going to talk about the money they're going to give us until we do environmental review. And he should thank me for this, because in the time that they did do the environmental review, we learned more about the project, and the money they gave us rose from $8 million, which he wanted to take, to $29 million. So I'd say my involvement in the wind farm project was a net win for the town.
Oh. Okay, we have a rebuttal here from Peter.
Yeah, I want to rebut a number of statements that Jeff's made. First of all, he voted no or abstained on the wind farm. With regard to environmental review, any easement that the town was negotiating would require full completion of full environmental review from both the Public Service Commission and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. He tells this story about how I came into his office and I physically loomed over him. I mean, it's just amazing drama that he puts together for his little statements. And, we didn't even start negotiating with Deepwater over the price of the easements, the value of the easements. They came off with an initial $8 million. Jeff wasn't involved in the direct negotiations, which were conducted with our outside counsel, myself, and the trustees. And we got $29 million in public benefits over the course of that. Jeff would now like everyone to believe that he supports wind power in that project. Didn't happen.
Another rebuttal?
Yeah, I'll have another rebuttal. We'll take a whack at this. The other thing I wanted to mention was this wonderful peak load program that he's saying was so great. What it was there was a company that had an agreement that they had to lower the level of peak demand, and they had targets that they had to hit. And the agreement was that they would hit them with renewable fuels. But what they did is they came to places like the town of East Hampton and said, if you get some of your buildings off the grid by burning fossil fuel, you'll help us meet the targets. And they agreed. We're the only town that bought into this. It was trading fossil fuel for fossil fuel. It didn't enhance our renewable energy at all. And the other thing is, they've had a disregard, an absolute disregard for community choice aggregation. It's a way to join up with Southampton, a nearby municipality, and it gives us the fastest access to renewable energy. And for some reason, East Hampton is 2 years behind on getting involved in it, and we haven't even joined up as of today. Big mistake.
Fine. Okay. You have another question, and Jeff, you will be first this time. What would be your priorities for the use of the transfer tax for water improvement?
Well, we use them actually. We have a committee that studies, that takes a look at projects. They come in and they bid. It's actually a very good project, a very good process for it. So I'm happy with the existing process. I can tell you about how it affected me personally recently. At one point in time, my opponent threw a problem that had languished under his supervision for years, and it was the Camp Hero homes in Montauk. 28 homes had been suffering with a faulty, outdated septic system that was polluting Hither Hill State Park and Oyster Pond. And because of the way they were structured, they were being billed for all the repairs, and they were languishing. They'd repair them year after year. It was never enough. And finally, he tossed the problem in my lap. I think it was a mission impossible. I know it was a mission impossible because Peter didn't like putting me on any committee at all, especially ones that I had the skills for. But you know what? One of the members of the housing office came up with an idea and said, I think this fits in with the water quality funds. Let's try it. He opposed me on it. And tried to fight me on it, but I eventually got the unanimous consent of the town board. And for the first time in like 25 years, we're now on the way to do the preliminary engineering to give these 28 homes a state-of-the-art septic system that'll stop the pollution in Hither Hill State Park and stop it in Oyster Pond. And he tried to fight it.
Okay, thank you. We are, Peter?
Yes, I never tried to fight any improvements in water quality anywhere in this town. Another storytelling episode with Mr. Bragman. The housing office did bring up this issue. It was the housing office, as he correctly stated, that did this. And the reason they did it is because this is an affordable housing district. And out of Camp Hero, they had to form their own sewer district in order to have their community system there. It has been plagued with problems over the years, which have been addressed. And the costs, for these folks have to be paid through the district. Jeff suggested that we put a low nitrogen system there. When they were angry about the additional costs, they contacted the town. And that's when I asked Jeff, being the lawyer, if he would take this up and speak with them. He actually never met with any of the members of that community at all. In fact, he refused to meet with them, stating that he was worried about them litigating. I'm not sure they even know now that he's proposed sewer district improvement there. But, it's just another case where he either didn't understand or misrepresented the facts. With the peak power agreement, we actually reduced fossil fuel emissions by 35% because our generator is more efficient than the production at the local peaker plant. And as far as CCA goes, there's no way you can have CCA on Long Island because of the onshore generation requirements. And that's going to require additional legislation in order to allow that. What the program that Southampton has, and they've tried to do CCA, but they ran up against the same issue. They actually hired somebody, an outside contractor, to put together their plan. So they paid them for a plan they can't implement. They're going to a community, a CCP system, which is a little bit different than what Mr. Bragman says. We're not behind the curve, we're leading.
Okay, thank you. This is going to be the last question now. Peter, you will go first. What projects or purchases do you see as a priority for use of the CPF monies?
What projects are a priority for me for the use of CPF monies? I have always thought that prioritizing waterfront properties and public access wherever possible is important. But really at this point, trying to preserve every single piece of nature that we have left intact. I don't know how my opponent's going to vote on this upcoming Buckskill farm preserve. The town has over 9 acres of farmland that's abutted by 4 building lots. One of them has already been completely denuded and is seeing the building of a giant McMansion on a rather small lot. Property values have become extremely expensive. At the same time, our revenues have increased too, because as more and more property transfers and those prices are higher, our revenues are higher, but we're going to have to spend more money. And frankly, I think some people are suffering from sticker shock, but we need to preserve what's left. And that means being rather aggressive, because in this market, properties, before we can even get a contract out the door, someone's come in and outbid us. We're only allowed to pay up to the appraised value of a property. And, we're getting outbid on important properties. We lost a beautiful piece that we would have loved to acquire down on Cranberry Hole Road. That will probably be developed now and beyond our reach. We have sea level rise issues, so we've prioritized low-lying coastal areas for acquisition. That's a priority. And of course, water quality projects through the CPF fund are extremely important to fund. Nothing's more precious than our groundwater or drinking water. We need to be able to protect that. And CPF allows us to utilize up to 20% of those CPF funds in any given year for those projects.
All right, thank you. And Jeff?
Well, this raises an interesting issue related to the CPF purchases that came up in this case that my opponent just alluded to, and that is a real failure of transparency. Because we're looking at a transaction where we're proposing to spend $6 million on 3 lots. We don't even know who we're dealing with. It's got a very strange structure where three very wealthy neighbors are, it may be more than three very wealthy neighbors, are contributing in excess of the value that we placed on it with our appraisal, and we don't know who they are. And secondly, you know, I revisited the property. I had visited it once before, and it's very strange because it really doesn't provide any public benefit. It's kind of a strip of land in front of a row of houses that no one is ever going to walk on. And, you know, while my opponent was touting the view shed that it creates, because it's a wooded area, because of the way the properties were zoned, even if they're built, there's a substantial portion of those properties that must be kept in green space. So the end result is going to be probably the way it looks now. It's hard up against like an 8-foot tall farm fence. And if you put a house there, they're clearly going to landscape it with green. But the real critical issue is, why are we doing this deal when all of the players in the deal seem to be extraordinarily wealthy people? They will come out of the transaction with significant tax deductible gifts. The public can't really access it and won't want to access it. And when you go to the road that has the view and look at it, that view is not going to change. So there are some real serious questions about this deal. And this is a problem with this supervisor. He has a lack of transparency. A lack of transparency.
You've already used up your 3 rebuttals.
I think
I'm sorry.
I only had 2. I thought I had 1 left.
I have 3 down for you.
I raised my hand, but I never gave 1 rebuttal, I believe. But in any case, if we're done, we're done.
Yeah, I think we are. I'm sorry. The candidates will now give their closing statements. And Peter, you will go first.
My family has ties here in East Hampton that go back to the 1700s. I've lived here for the better part of my life. My children were born here. I raised them with my wife of 34 years, Marilyn, who taught at East Hampton High School for over 25 years as their band director. Our children attended local schools. To me, there's no place on earth I would rather be than East Hampton. East Hampton is my home. My vision for East Hampton is for a future that's forever vigilant in protecting our natural resources, a future that honors our past, respects our traditions, diversity, and a full opportunity for our residents who live and work here. There's still much more to do to ensure our future will continue and people will be able to enjoy the bounty of our surroundings and the care our small town offers. I'm Peter van Scoyoc. I'm the Democratic candidate for supervisor. I'm endorsed by the Working Families Party, the New York League of Conservation Voters, the Sierra Club, the Long Island Environmental Voters Forum, legislator Bridget Fleming, Suffolk County Executive Steve Ballone, and Newsday. I ask for your vote on November 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff, your turn.
Yeah, I'm not a my way or the highway type guy. With me, pretty much what you see is what you get. And I welcome ideas from anybody. Well, I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent. I am going to say again, because I want you to remember it, that I want a quieter, calmer, and slower East Hampton. I'd like the houses to get smaller. I'd like the parties to get quieter. You know, I ran for office for only one reason. I wanted to speak the truth plainly. And I still think you can do it in a small town like this because we don't have all that political bickering that goes on. I think that we need more of that. I think we need more candor in town hall. I think we need to open the doors and let the fresh air in and invite the public in. I'm not afraid to address the public. I went to Montauk last weekend and got heckled off a very hostile stage. I learn when I listen to the public. I believe in leading by listening. If I think East Hampton needs an independent voice, I need the help of the public. I'm on the independence line, the bottom line. It's the bottom line that counts.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank both candidates for their informative and thought-provoking responses, and to thank all of those viewing the debates for joining us. But most importantly, don't forget to vote. You may vote at your usual voting site on Election Day, November 2nd, or at an early voting site from October 23rd through the 31st. And be sure to log on to vote411.org to learn more about the candidates and the propositions that will be on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you.